Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming. Welcome to The Lost Crown. This is the new Prince of Persia game, which is a funny thing to say after so long without one. One of my favorite games I'd ever played growing up was Prince of Persia Sands of Time. It was that incredible mix of parkour style traversal, ultra agile combat, and the insane ability to rewind time where you could do that mid-fight, mid-puzzle or platforming. Or most importantly, right as you died you could rewind time to prevent the death. Really cool concept, and they did a lot of clever stuff with it. But it's been a long time since then. A long time now since a mainline Prince of Persia. And so here we are with The Lost Crown, releasing on the 15th of January. I've just been lucky enough to play it a little bit early. Now this certainly isn't the same style of game as Sands of Time though. This is kind of a 2D, 3D action adventure game. You know, an action platformer that's very Metroidvania. In fact, the very way that the game flows and feels, especially with that huge map that's all interconnected with different freedom of choice elements, it really reminds me of Hollow Knight, which is also one of my favorite games of all time. The mix of these two then definitely grabbed my attention, which has led to this video, and after my early hands-on with it then, I wanted to give a little first impression style review with minimal spoilers. I have been impressed with it though. The combat has been surprisingly in depth beyond just sort of flashy basics, still keeping the vibe of a Prince of Persia game with the very agile combat itself and the time-based powers. So it's been a refreshing return to the series for me. Let's talk about it. We'll give some quick context to the story and setting to begin. We are returning to the Kingdom of Persia, which is protected by this elite squad known as the Immortals, which our character belongs to. It's these 7 insanely strong, basically superhuman types. The game opens with a large-scale battle that ends with the defeat of the enemy general, only to go wrong during the celebrations when the prince is kidnapped. We play as this character Sargon, the youngest of the Immortals, who vows to rescue the Prince of Persia. Yep, nice twist instead of being the prince. And this hunt ends up taking us to this ancient city, home of the god of time, who has also been missing for a little while. Naturally, this location and the adventure takes on a twisted turn where the timelines begin to sort of overlap. The team separates when you arrive there, and then you meet them later on, only to find them greatly aged. Some say they've been here for days or even 30 years, while you've only been here for 5 minutes. At one point you find what appears to be yourself, having found the bow of a friend who'd never give that up unless he was dead, but then you meet him perfectly fine not long after, and there's now 2 versions of that bow. So this leads to some very clever story stuff, and obviously you're going to need to work out what the hell's going on here and save the prince before it's too late. Okay, so let's talk about the flow of the game. If you've not played a Metroidvania of this kind before, you basically have this massive, sprawling map that's interconnected in many ways. This means you can go wherever in whichever direction, exploring at random rather than forced upon a set path. Of course, there's going to be an ideal route for max efficiency, but you can go whichever way you want, especially to areas you probably shouldn't because you're not strong enough. There is also areas you're just not going to be able to progress to, secrets you can't quite reach because you have to unlock powers and other ways to move around that you don't have immediately. This means going back to somewhere that you've explored before becomes a big part of the game. And they give you these special markers where you can kind of place a thing and say, hey, there was something here. But when you hover over on the map, it gives you an actual screenshot that you can look at, which is a really clever way to refresh your memory on what's actually over there. There's still the classic checkpoints in the form of these yellow trees, letting you go to them to save and swap gear and return to when you die. It's basically a bonfire. And there is fast travel as well to help you get around, which you unlock after a little bit of progress. Pretty important since the map itself is massive, but the altars only let you go to other altars. It's not like true teleportation, which is good. There's also the very standard hub called the Haven here. Here you'll get upgrades, progress quests, and talk with NPCs, buy stuff, and so on. Alongside that shop, a blacksmith, and also a swordsmaster. The swordmaster's more of a unique one. He lets you do these combat challenges, which are basically tutorials to teach you the combat details. And they're worth doing because they actually reward currency you then spend on upgrades, alongside teaching those key mechanics you might miss otherwise. But I also want to mention that throughout the whole game, there's a ton of hidden areas. Breakable walls, secret areas you can squeeze into, mystery chests. So a nice level of detail there because it keeps you interested and paying attention to where you are and if there's something you find. There's also standard stuff like collectibles, lore items, or slightly more interesting, different outfit options you'll unlock too. But let's get into the main highlight of the game for me, which is the combat. You start with this plethora of options immediately, way more than I expected. You've got your basic attack combo and charge attacks, sure, but then there's aerial combos, which can be enhanced in different ways. You could hold down to attack with a sweep of the leg, or hold up to uppercut. If you do this in the air, you could say slam down. Or if you do a dash attack, you do this kind of kick upwards to start a juggle, which you can jump up and start juggling enemies in the air. If you do a full sprint sprint attack, you do a sort of shoving kick, which is great for displacing enemies or knocking them into terrain stuff. And there's the core things like dodging and parrying, moving through enemies to get behind them, or just parrying and punishing normally. There are some special attacks you need to be aware of though. Yellows can be parried and should be, because they reward you with this sort of powerful animation. Very satisfying to do because you could be mid-flow of an attack and then parry something anyway and immediately do one of these special animations. Whereas on the other hand, of course, they've got unparryables in the form of these red attacks. You want to avoid those. So quite a few options to start with, but it gets more interesting when we talk about combos. Instead of doing 3 basics, you could do 2 basics and hold a heavy attack to do a special double stab. Or in the air, you could do 2 lights and do a held down attack for a special slam. You could work in bow shots or surges, and the combos start to get longer and more interesting. That's because later you unlock the bow weapon and also a chakram. The bow can be used to fire up to 10 arrows at a time for nice ticks of damage, but not too much. You can upgrade it, but it's clearly meant for combo purposes. For example, let's say you're juggling an enemy in the air. You can actually keep yourself and the enemy in the air longer by interrupting your own combo with an air shot and then starting a new combo. On the other hand, the chakram allows for actual aim shots, which is neat to see it bounce around. It'll show the path it's going to go. But way cooler is the fact that you can parry your own chakram as it returns to you, sending it back at double the speed, but also the fact that you landed a parry, which generates resources and more. So it's a very cool weapon to use mid-combat. They do have some sort of special powers though, in the form of Athra surges. You find them throughout the game and are managed by levels. You fill a bar, maybe multiple times, and spend it on the powers. So they cost more or less levels depending on their power, and they're both defensive and offensive use. Very strong, but limited by the fact that you can only have 2 equipped at any one time, and they do have cooldowns. Some examples would be the dash attack, which breaks all guards, which they give you immediately, or the spin attack, which is really good DPS, especially if the enemy stays within, which is very good if you're dealing damage in a boss fight against like a staggered boss. On the other hand, a defensive option would be like the breath one, which basically puts down a potent healing zone to stand in. And these surges can also be weaved into combos to generate new ways to attack, which is pretty cool. I should also mention the main time powers, of course. It's a Prince of Persia game. There's 6 of these in the game total. They allow you to begin exploring the region in a more interesting way, reaching new places you couldn't before, solve puzzles that you couldn't before. These come at key points as you follow the main story, of course, natural progression that you just get, but then mean you can go back and go rediscover new areas in places you've already explored. The very first one you get is that iconic wall run, except you're generating a wall out of nothing anywhere you want to use this. So visually very cool, mechanically it's just a dream to have after so many places you barely can't reach. The other thing I want to mention for combat is something you do before fighting. It's the amulets. They provide passive perks and is the main way the devs actually let you do builds. You get them by exploring, looting, buying, even side quests, so they're worth doing. And you start with 3 slots, but they increase the amount of slots surprisingly fast. I just found an upgrade and went from 3 to 4, and I could buy one from the shop to go to 5 pretty quick. And these provide big power spikes. Apparently there's over 30 amulets to find and use in the game, so that's kind of how you form your builds. Very Hollow Knight talisman style. Now I'd also like to quickly cover the platforming itself. Very Prince of Persia in the whole bouncing off walls to climb up. I remember that blowing me away as a kid with the Sands of Time game. You can really sprint through here, sliding past any enemy if timed right, weaving between the traps. The traps themselves can be pretty damn tight though. They really require careful jump timings so you don't go too high or too far. So it can be pretty satisfying to get by, but also very punishing to clip them. And you progress the complexity of that platforming pretty quick. Yeah, at first it's just climbing things, jump height, distance management, but then you get the bow and now you're unlocking platforms and aiming while moving, landing on the platform you just generated right at the last moment. Machinery that can be moved and changed by the chakram fire, which you need to bounce in certain ways to reach certain things, and with it flying back to you, timings are going to be important. In terms of exploring the right way, it does feel very minimal in obvious or clear indicators. At first I just didn't know if I was going the right way at all. Kind of just stumbling around and going into new areas and quite difficult terrain. Clearly some sections that are meant to be done later on, but let you go straight away if you want, and you can kind of bull your way through to a certain point. Originally I went straight down into the sewers, which was probably a mistake. It felt like I wasn't dealing enough damage, there was way more enemies than I was used to in the starting area. It very much felt like I was meant to be stronger before exploring there, but I still could do it. There is a mode option at the start of the game where you can choose to go into sort of navigation easy mode, but I would like to see some kind of more subtle indicators in the normal mode. There are some like the yellow lines that lead you to the trees, which is helpful, or buying hints from the NPC in the hub. But overall, I think the map and the way you move through it is fantastic, and it is worth it to pay attention to where you are if there's any secrets. The boss fights so far have been pretty cool too. They throw a few mini bosses at you while you're just going through the main section. There's one main boss fight at the introduction of the game. It's a two-phase fight with a general that's riding a horse. You kind of dismount him to finish him off. Or the first main boss of the proper game, that's the Manticore, throwing every main mechanic at you at once. There's this floating orb that you need to take out with your bow and chakram to deal enough damage to it while dealing with the boss at the same time, which has, you know, the red attacks you have to dodge, the yellows you're going to need to parry, and DPS windows that are provided when you land a stagger that you need to make the most of, probably using a surge. I made cool use of the chakram parry at the end there to finish off the last bit of health from far, safely too, which was really satisfying. But I'm interested to see how they're going to push the difficulty on this one, considering they threw a lot at me pretty much on that first boss. But yeah, I think that brings me to the conclusion so I don't go overly in depth and get into any real spoilers at this point. I think The Lost Crown brings a good amount new to the table for the series. It's still classic Prince of Persia, but Metroidvania is a very different take. Visually, it's fantastic, a lot of variety. I was in a lower city, a temple, I was in the sewers, I was in the woods, I was in a cave, and then you go up to the upper city, all within quite an interesting setting with all the time trickery going on. I did find the characters a bit obvious and one note in who they were, but the story has been enjoyable so far. The platforming's fun and very punishing at the same time, but it provides a really fast pace and I really like that. But it's the combat that's the highlight of the game for me so far. The surprising amount of combos and options you have immediately. It's not all needing to be unlocked over time. There was a bit of a weird lack of punishment on death though. I thought I would lose currency and need to fight to get it back, you know, that classic concept, but it was more of just an inconvenience. I was playing kind of the standard difficulty they suggest, so maybe on the really hard modes, it's going to get tougher. But yeah, that gameplay was what I thought it would be, an enjoyable Metroidvania style experience. The story and the time trickery going on, that's been what surprised me most. Very clever, very fun. I'm interested to see where it goes. And I would say that if you're a fan of a game like Hollow Knight or maybe Ori and the Blind Forest, I think this game is going to be right up your street. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.